A haunting quietude emerges when you gaze upon your reflection following a soundless weeping. Your features appear puffy and crimson. Your vision remains clouded, yet what truly astounds you transcends the weariness visible on the surface. It manifests as a peculiar, disturbing sensation, as though you're observing a completely unfamiliar person. Not the individual you've attempted to maintain, enhance, or satisfy, but a spirit that has recently emerged from its former casing, positioned naked before an undeniable reality. You cannot continue existing as your previous self. Carl Jung once declared, "The spirit possesses an inherent yearning for completeness, not flawlessness, not approval from external sources, but completeness, the balance between the public identity and the profound inner essence." Yet to progress toward that completeness, there exists one inescapable stage, the stage of dissolution. It occurs when the facades crumble, the courteous grins, the hesitant agreements, the occasions you proclaimed everything was fine while your spirit fractured internally. All of it suddenly becomes too burdensome, too artificial to continue bearing. You no longer possess the energy to act, no longer wish to ensure others' comfort, no longer sense the obligation to appear pleasant, suitable, or precisely correct. And within that depletion, a voyage commences. Not a voyage to transform into the coveted individual, but to evolve into the individual you select to become. This represents what Jung termed the individuation process. When someone starts to retreat from societal demands, to listen to their internal voice, recall their identity, and reconstruct themselves from within, silently, without recognition, yet profoundly, determinedly, and permanently. First, the expedition to becoming oneself, transcending the shadow and the facades. Certain individuals spend their complete existence pursuing affection, yet never experience life as their authentic selves. They receive recognition for their devotion, their kindness, and their compliance. However, deep within their spirits resides a quiet lament that remains unheard. Carl Gustav Jung once stated, "The most frightening experience is to embrace oneself entirely." This isn't merely romantic ideology. It serves as an awakening signal, a murmur that penetrates the numerous identity layers individuals have adopted throughout centuries. From the compliant child who displays appropriate reactions to the passionate companion who understands how to satisfy, to the flawless parent who consistently prioritizes others. These aren't naturally false representations, but without consciousness, they transform into masks that stifle the spirit. In Jung's analytical framework, these socially imposed roles are termed archetypes, ancient images dwelling within the collective unconscious. Archetypes, including the parent, the youth, the companion, the nurturer, function as internal guides to assist our world navigation. Yet when one archetype becomes exaggerated or constitutes someone's sole identity, they forfeit their sense of wholeness. An individual restricted to the self-sacrificing parent role might forget they're also a companion, a creator, a risk embracer. Someone who exists entirely within the compliant archetype frequently cannot refuse, cannot express frustration, and progressively learns to exist in internal silence. One of the most evident indicators of this inner suffocation is the persistent conflict between external appearance and internal voice. Many accomplished, respected, cherished individuals still discover themselves quietly suffering in isolation, uncertain why they feel so hollow. Because what they're experiencing isn't their essence, but their persona. The social facade Jung described as the person's adaptation system, or the manner they assume when engaging with the world. The persona enables social functioning, but if we maintain it excessively, we forget the face underneath it, and then eventually the shadow emerges. Jung described the shadow as the rejected, suppressed, and unacceptable elements of the human spirit. It's where our repressed frustration, denied jealousy, condemned sensuality, and silenced wildness exist. For many, the shadow is frequently filled with emotions labeled excessive, overly sensitive, too powerful, too independent, too emotional. To receive love, many learn to conceal their darkness until it becomes too massive, too powerful, and explodes in crisis. It might manifest as unexplainable depression, internal tension within a perfect relationship, or a collapse following brilliant success. Because, as Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, and you will call it destiny. When the shadow remains unrecognized, it controls us from the darkness. The genuine journey begins when someone no longer fears their shadow, but learns to communicate with it. This is when they begin to permit themselves to experience anger without guilt, to acknowledge their desires without shame, to refuse, to not desire, to withdraw from roles they once believed were their fate. Someone undergoing psychological awakening will experience days of turmoil when they're no longer who they were, but don't yet know who they are. This is the transformation interval where masks fall, relationships change, and the inner world becomes a chaotic construction site. But it's also the moment a new self begins to breathe. The truth is, the darkness isn't the enemy, it's the guide. Jung once said, "One doesn't become enlightened by imagining light figures, but by making the darkness conscious." It's by stepping into the very places we fear most, where we feel inadequate, unlovable, excessive, that we unlock wholeness. And the miracle is when someone dares to accept their shadow. They also unleash a true life force. They become deeper, more compassionate, more powerful, and radiant in a way that can't be learned or fabricated. I recall someone once shared with me. She was a perfect spouse, always gentle, always proper, always putting others first. But after a sudden divorce, she spiraled into panic and began therapy. Through that process, she faced a painful truth. She had never lived for herself. She learned to journal, to go alone into the forest, to try painting, to scream, to cry. And finally she said, "I don't know who this individual is, but she feels more alive than ever." That was her real self, long hidden under the shadow, now being released layer by layer. When someone moves beyond their shadow and masks, they don't become a better version to please others. They don't become a replica of any ideal archetype. They become themselves. Messy, complex, sometimes unpredictable, but always real. And that truth, once lived, emits an energy that those around them can feel. An unnamed magnetic presence. Not because they're perfect, but because they're honest to the bone. In today's world where images are meticulously edited, emotions are standardized, and people are constantly told how they should be, this journey of facing the shadow, removing the masks, and choosing oneself is nothing short of revolutionary. Someone who dares to walk into their darkness to reclaim their light is transforming not just their life, but the world around them. And perhaps that is the kind of person everyone wants to be near. Not because they try to be loved, but because they've chosen to love the truth of who they are. Second, the awakening moment from suffering to rebirth. And then, when the masks have fallen, when the shadow is no longer avoided, but looked straight in the eye, the individual crosses a new threshold, not one of peace, but of the ruins of the old self slowly collapsing. This is the phase Jung never sugarcoated, because the process of individuation doesn't begin with comfort. It begins with a crisis. The real question now is, have you ever had a fall so deep that it forced you to meet yourself again? For many, rebirth begins with a psychological shock that feels like it will destroy them. An unexpected divorce, a cold goodbye after years of effort, a betrayal by a friend. Or more quietly, a morning when they wake up and can't find a single reason to get out of bed. What seemed like just feelings touches the root where every role, every expectation, every habit suddenly feels hollow. In that moment of loss when all external supports collapse, the deepest self begins to speak. As Jung wrote, the individual who wishes to have an answer to the problem of evil has need, first and foremost, of self-knowledge. In darkness, pain, and evil, lies the hidden opportunity to understand oneself. Maybe you've been in that dark room where no one calls, where silence stretches so long you begin to hear your soul. You think you're lonely, but in truth, you're meeting someone important who's been forgotten. You. In Jung's philosophy, this is the starting point of what he called inner alchemy, not the escape from pain, but the transformation of pain into awakening. Just like classical alchemy turns lead into gold, inner alchemy turns collapse into strength, wounds into doors to the soul. Someone once wrote to the program sharing that they had lived a proper life, spouse, children, a stable job, and a family proud of them. But one morning, after the kids left for school and their spouse left for work, they sat down at the breakfast table and burst into tears. Not for any specific reason. They just felt an emptiness so frightening it made them tremble. Not long after, they sank into a deep depression, but instead of taking medication and returning to normal, they began to write. They recorded their hidden feelings, their buried dreams, the time they said yes when they wanted to scream no. And in reading Jung, they came across this line: "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." They cried again, because for the first time their pain was allowed to exist. If you're reading this and your heart tightens, if you're going through something and asking, why me, then maybe this isn't your collapse. Maybe this is your beginning. In Jung's system, the soul doesn't stay asleep forever. At some point, it will rise and demand to live fully, and often it chooses to awaken through the touch of pain. What's fascinating is that Jung never encouraged people to move on quickly or to stay positive. He believed true transformation happens when we stay with ourselves through the chaos, through the wreckage, because the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. To face oneself in the moment of greatest weakness isn't defeat, it's the gateway to inner power. An awakened individual isn't someone who is always strong. They're someone who knows what it means to fall. They have lain curled up without anyone calling. They have asked for help and received only silence. They have loved others so much they lost themselves. But in those unseen nights they're reborn from the wreckage, not through rage but with the quiet commitment. From now on, I will not abandon myself again. Do you remember a moment in your life when you thought you had hit bottom, yet somehow rose again? That was no accident. That was the sacred alchemy Jung described, the transformation that begins not with denial or illusion, but with acceptance of the truth. In the dark, in loneliness, in confusion, your soul is learning to say, I am mine. It's ironic how many believe an attractive person is one who never breaks down, never cries, never shows weakness. But those who have shattered, who have dared to sit alone with their pain, possess a healing energy that can't be faked. They don't speak with words, they speak with presence. No persuasion needed, no effort to impress, because their soul has been melted down and reformed from within. And as Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest gift of life isn't to be loved, it's to become yourself. If you are now in the gray zone, where the old has collapsed and the new has not yet formed, don't rush for an exit. Stay, feel, write, scream if you must. Like a master alchemist at the furnace, you are forging your true self. And in that red fire, an individual is being born, not from ideals, but from ashes. You are so close, you may not see it yet, but something within you is shifting. This isn't the end. This is the beginning of the miracle. Third, the rise of the integrated individual, the archetype of the whole being. After the storm, while the ashes still smolder in their chest, something strange begins to happen. This individual no longer seeks rescue. They no longer hope for someone to come and pull them from the abyss. They no longer write long messages to hold on to fractured relationships. They begin to do something that once felt impossible, and they stay with themselves. It's not a dramatic decision, but a quiet, profound shift. A movement from within, as if the soul has stopped pleading and started to speak in its voice. Have you ever felt that? A morning where you no longer care what others think, and all you want is to be honest with your heart. That is the moment someone begins to rise from within as a new whole, a version of themselves that no longer lives to please, but to stay true to their essence. Jung called this the transition from the persona, the social self, to the self, the center of the soul. When someone sheds the false layers and returns to their core, they're no longer the product of expectation. They're a sovereign being, no longer needing to be loved to feel worthy. They become love through the way they exist. Someone like this doesn't need to force strength. They don't need to prove anything. They know when to speak and when to stay silent. They can be soft without being weak, firm without being cruel, because they've made peace with both their light and their shadow. No longer fragmented, no longer at war with themselves. In Jung's world, they're living in a state of psychic integration, a union of the soul. And this is what gives them a quiet magnetism no one can define, but everyone feels. Jung's concepts of anima and animus are especially important to understand this transformation. According to him, within every soul lives an inner opposite. Men carry the feminine archetype, while individuals carry the masculine animus. When someone hasn't matured their animus, they often seek others to compensate for a lack of direction, autonomy, or strength. They may fall into unequal relationships where the other person becomes a savior, a guide, or the one who makes them feel valuable. But when the animus is integrated, they no longer need a father or a hero. They seek an equal partner. Jung wrote, "The animus corresponds to the paternal logos, just as the anima corresponds to the maternal eros." This means that when someone develops their animus, they connect not only to reason, boundaries, and direction, but also learn to think for themselves, to make decisions, to chart their course. They no longer need someone to rescue them from their emotions. They've learned how to stand within them and act not from pain, but from awareness. I once met someone like that after many years in a marriage where they had to shrink themselves to keep the peace. They finally chose to leave, not because they hated their spouse, but because they no longer wanted to betray themselves. When I asked what gave them the strength, they simply said, "I've been with myself long enough to no longer want to abandon myself." That is the sign of a mature animus. Not clear, not aggressive, simply a certainty so deep that nothing can disturb it. If you're walking this path, you might sense that everything surrounding you is transforming. Individuals who previously felt near may now seem remote. Connections that once appeared vital now seem superficial. Don't be alarmed. This doesn't indicate you're mistaken. It signifies your vibration is evolving. And when a woman starts to exist in authenticity, whatever is no longer grounded in authenticity naturally dissolves. The most magnificent aspect is this. Such a woman isn't compelling due to her appearance or her witty remarks. She influences others through her aura. In every look, movement, and pause, she embodies the centered power only someone who has journeyed through darkness can hold. And that's something impossible to counterfeit. Authenticity doesn't require proclamation. It emanates quietly in how you create space for yourself, and from that create space for others. Jung once stated, "Completeness is not accomplished by removing a section of one's existence, but through integration of the opposing psychological elements of the character." A complete woman isn't someone who has eliminated her vulnerabilities or who retains only the acceptable aspects. She is someone who has mastered standing with both her gentleness and her intensity, her yearning and her tranquility, and because of this, she no longer exists to be selected. She exists because she has selected herself. Do you sense something transforming within you? Perhaps it's not yet evident. But if there's a piece of you that has ceased attempting to satisfy, that no longer seeks authorization to exist, understand that the complete woman inside you is emerging, not from flawlessness, but from absolute honesty. Not to be cherished, but because she has chosen to cherish herself. And maybe that is the type of woman everyone yearns to be around. Not because she requires them, but because she has become herself, and that is sufficient. The strength of declining and authentic appeal. Why is she wanted by all? Fourth point, the strength of declining and authentic appeal. Why is she wanted by all? Not every illumination is blinding. Some women enter a space with no glamorous attire, no boisterous voice, no attempt to capture attention, and yet everyone rotates to observe. She performs nothing theatrical, but her presence transforms the environment. There is a silent energy flowing from her, a type of magnetism nobody can interpret. And if you observe carefully, you'll discover it is the strength of authenticity. She is not the most attractive in the space, not the kindest, the most compliant, or the simplest to satisfy. She doesn't attempt to be appreciated, and she certainly doesn't worry about being endorsed. And that is precisely what distinguishes her. Jung never suggested a woman should forsake her instinct to be cherished. He simply noted that when we prioritize being cherished over being genuine, we forfeit ourselves. A complete woman doesn't require being appreciated to feel valuable, because as Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, the most crucial question anyone can pose is, what narrative am I living? She doesn't exist according to someone else's narrative. She exists the story her spirit is composing. Have you ever encountered a woman who doesn't excuse her emotion? She doesn't conceal her tears, doesn't disguise her happiness or her grief. She doesn't retreat when her voice quivers with emotion, and she doesn't fear when her stare becomes cold, if necessary. That's a sign of integration. She's not performing strength, she's genuinely been to the depths and returned. She doesn't pretend to be well. She's been shattered, she's been reborn. And now the fractures in her are the very locations where illumination enters. Carl Jung once said, "Only the wounded healer restores." Collected Works, Volume 10. The one who can truly restore is the one who has carried their wounds. And the complete woman is living evidence of that. She doesn't use her strength to control, but uses her experience to establish a secure environment. She doesn't need to be superior to anyone, doesn't need to triumph, doesn't need to demonstrate. She doesn't decline to assert herself. She declines because she understands the value of her energy. She knows how to refuse. She establishes limits. She doesn't exchange her mental peace to avoid disturbing others. She doesn't suppress her intuition just to maintain harmony. And most importantly, she no longer apologizes for her depth. She no longer states, "I know I contemplate too much," or "Sorry if I made you uncomfortable because I'm sensitive." Those were once passes to be accepted, to be loved, but now she comprehends her depth is not a defect, it is a blessing. Genuine attraction doesn't originate from fitting neatly into someone's preferences, it originates from inner completeness. When a woman becomes the protector of her boundaries, the universe starts to reorganize itself around her. Those who once exploited her find themselves excluded. Relationships once maintained by people-pleasing start to diminish. But in exchange, she starts to attract those who have also traveled their path, those with depth, honesty, and a readiness to appear fully. If you are learning to refuse, if your hands are still shaking as you practice maintaining boundaries, then you are getting very close to yourself, and you are becoming dangerous in the most beautiful way. Dangerous to systems that once demanded your diminishment, dangerous to the types of love that request your authorization to exist. And above all, you are becoming irresistibly magnetic in a way nobody can fabricate. Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Clarity doesn't come from the gaze of others. It comes from daring to look inward and not turning away. The woman who is wanted by everyone isn't pursuing anyone's gaze. She has chosen to confront herself and to remain. And you, if you are on this path, know this. Every time you refuse when you mean refuse, every time you stop apologizing for your honest emotions, every time you hold yourself back from people-pleasing, you are becoming that woman. Not everyone will comprehend. Not everyone will appreciate it, but your energy will reach the ones who are meant to feel it. And once you are honest with yourself, the magnetism you radiate will need no justification. Reconstructing life and perspective. Fifth point, reconstructing life and perspective. The magnetism of an honest woman doesn't lie only in the quiet beauty she carries, but in the silent transformation happening within her world. Because when a woman dares to establish boundaries, dares to reject what no longer aligns with her truth, what follows is not just respect from others, it's a complete reconstruction. Her relationships, her way of living, and most profoundly the belief system she once held as absolute, all begin to transform. Have you ever felt that once you start living truthfully, the entire world around you starts to change? At first, that change doesn't feel pleasant. It's often painful. Once close, people may begin to drift. Relationships that used to mean everything suddenly feel shallow. Friends stop calling like they used to. Family might say, "You've changed." And they're right, just not in the way they think. The loss is real. Jung understood this deeply. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "To rest in the comfort zone of the collective opinion is to evade the call of individuation." When you begin the path of individuation, you no longer belong to the collective you came from because your soul is calling you to a new place where honesty matters more than fitting in. I remember a guest once shared on the show that after leaving a 12-year relationship, she felt as though she had just stepped into an empty desert. Not only did she lose her partner, she also drifted apart from mutual friends, from her in-laws, and from the routines that had once defined her life. But in that desert, she began to hear things she had never heard before. Her inner voice. "I'm no longer afraid of silence," she said, "because in it, for the first time, I heard myself." And strangely, when you stop trying to hold on to what no longer fits, you begin to attract what truly does. Not surface-level friendships, not people you have to contort yourself for, but soul-aligned beings. Other women on the same journey back to themselves. They don't compete. They don't try to win. They don't rush to offer hollow advice. They listen. They show up. They cry with you unashamedly, and they celebrate when you dare to speak your truth. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, the mysterious way the universe rearranges itself to match your inner frequency. When you transform from within, your old worldview starts to collapse. You stop believing that everything needs to be logically understood to be valid. Intuition sharpens, you dream more, and your dreams stop being chaotic nonsense. They become symbols, messages. Jung believed dreams were the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul, man and his symbols. A woman amid awakening begins to realize that wisdom is not knowing everything. It's learning to listen to what she doesn't yet understand. She listens to dreams, to her body, to the strange emotions that rise when she enters a room or hears a certain melody. And from there, she starts living by an internal compass, not an external schedule. As she goes deeper, she begins to recognize the archetypes moving within her. When she feels creatively alive, passionate, and sensually grounded, perhaps the lover archetype is activated. When she longs to nurture and support others, the mother is speaking. When she feels drawn to solitude and contemplation, withdrawing from the crowd, it is the wise woman guiding her. These archetypes are no longer molds to conform to, but living languages that help her understand herself and navigate her path. Do you feel like you no longer want to explain your changes? Do you feel yourself starting to trust an intuition you once dismissed? If so, you're very close to the heart of transformation. Don't be afraid if old connections don't understand you. Don't panic if you no longer feel at home in places that once felt familiar. The boredom you feel with the old is a sign that you are stepping into something more real. Jung once said, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." Collected Works, Volume 14. Change doesn't come from forcing yourself to become someone else. It begins with the courage to accept that you've already changed. From there, everything begins to restructure, not around others' expectations, but around the truth within you. A woman who restructures her life doesn't need elaborate plans. She begins by saying yes to what feels right, by rearranging her living space, by stepping outside alone in the early morning, by writing down her dreams, by accepting that she is no longer who she used to be, and letting go of the hope that others will understand. This kind of restructuring isn't an earthquake, it's a quiet series of small, consistent and irreversible shifts. And that is how she steps into her real life. No longer borrowing beliefs, no longer living someone else's dream. Every step, whether uncertain or alone, is a step toward a world where she is fully herself and needs no permission to be. Integrating the inner archetypes, the lover, the mother, the magician, the maiden. Sixth point, integrating the inner archetypes, the lover, the mother, the magician, the maiden. And then, when a woman begins to walk to the rhythm of her steps, no longer chasing the applause of others, she enters a deeper layer of the journey. It's no longer about escaping the old. It's about weaving together the fragmented pieces within her into a living, breathing whole. This is no longer the effort to shed old roles, but the conscious choice to live as a full symphony, where every facet of her is acknowledged, listened to, and allowed to coexist without conflict. Jung called this an essential part of the individuation process, the integration of inner archetypes. One mistake many women make, not because they're wrong, but because they've been taught to, is believing they must only be one thing: a good mother, a sweet lover, a beautiful wife, or a modest daughter. They choose a role, often the one most easily loved, most socially accepted, and abandon the rest. But each archetype isn't a fixed box. It's a stream of energy waiting to be activated, fluid, dynamic, and meant to co-create the psychological landscape of a whole human being. Within every woman live multiple archetypes. She might be the lover, sensual, passionate, drawn to beauty, unafraid to seek joy. The mother, nurturing, patient, compassionate, a safe place to land. The magician or wise woman, deeply intuitive, drawn to solitude with a timeless perspective. And the maiden, free-spirited, curious, creative, and rich with wonder. These archetypes don't cancel each other out. On the contrary, they are all facets of the same being. I once spoke with a woman in her 50s, a former CEO of a major tech company. For years, she embodied the magician and mother archetypes, rational, sharp, tending to both her team and her family. But after a health crisis, she said she began to feel burnt out inside. She started taking belly dance classes. She went to figure drawing sessions. She wrote love letters to herself. She laughed and said, "I realize there's still a playful young girl in me. That part's not dead." And it wasn't. Her lover and maiden archetypes weren't there to replace her previous roles. They were awakening to expand her inner terrain, helping her live more fully, more truthfully. Carl Jung believed psychological freedom doesn't come from cutting away parts we don't need. It comes from allowing all parts of ourselves to coexist without shame, without war. True maturity doesn't mean choosing one side, but reconciling the opposites within. You can crave sensuality and also enjoy quiet nights reading philosophy. You can nurture your children and also need space where no one needs you. You can laugh loudly at a party and cry quietly to a song at midnight. And most importantly, you don't have to apologize for any of it. If you've ever felt disoriented by inner contradictions, don't worry. That's a good sign. It means your archetypes are waking up, sometimes all at once. Don't rush to choose just one. Start by listening. One day, you may feel the urge to create something beautiful. That's the lover guiding you. On another, you crave silence and ancient books. That's the magician whispering. Another day, you may want to lie on the floor and doodle. That's the maiden. And when someone needs comfort, the mother will emerge without being summoned. You are all of these, and you are allowed to be all of them. A woman who integrates her archetypes no longer asks, "Who should I be to be loved?" She asks, "Which part of me needs to come alive today?" That question not only frees her from societal pressure, it unlocks creative energy in art, in work, in how she loves, speaks, and shows up. She no longer tries to be the ideal woman. She becomes a vibrant, uncontainable being, fluid, radiant, and uncaged. Jung wrote a line I deeply love in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Wholeness doesn't come from slicing away what we dislike. It comes from weaving together everything we are. And you, if you've read this far, pause for just a moment and ask yourself, is there a part of me I've neglected for too long? Is there an archetype knocking, asking to be lived through me again? If the answer is yes, open the door. The path to becoming a whole woman is not a straight line. It is a dance between the parts of your soul. And you are the choreographer. You don't need permission. You don't need perfection. You only need honesty and the courage to be all that you are without shame. That is true freedom. Conclusion. Perhaps the most beautiful and difficult part of becoming a whole woman is not learning something new, but having the courage to peel away everything that isn't you. The layers of be nice, be agreeable, be lovable, be selfless once kept you safe, helped you belong, but at some point they became a prison. And the moment you say enough, not with rage but with clarity, is the moment you begin to become the woman you want to be, not the woman someone else expected. You don't need to be the woman everyone desires. The truth is, the most deeply loved women are often those who never tried to be. She simply lives so truthfully that she cannot be ignored. And then she begins to attract the right things, the right people, the right love, not because she performs, but because she has chosen herself. There is a strange stillness in the eyes of a woman who knows who she is when she stands in front of the mirror, not to adjust herself to someone else's preferences, but simply to look and smile, because the woman in the reflection is someone she once dreamed of becoming. Not perfect, not untouched by sadness, not always strong, but honest, whole, and no longer asking for permission to exist. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Collected Works, Volume Padimra. You cannot step into the deepest version of yourself by chasing false positivity. You must pass through the dark. You must embrace the pain. You must touch the things you once buried. And it is from that place that you truly begin to shine, not with borrowed brilliance, but with a light kindled from within. If you are somewhere in the middle of this journey, if things feel messy, if you still feel lost or doubtful, you are not alone. We are a generation of women waking up together, laying down old burdens together, choosing ourselves not out of fear, but out of love. Every time you speak your truth, every time you set a boundary, every time you stop criticizing yourself, that's a small shockwave sent into the collective unconscious, where thousands of other women are waiting for someone to do it first. When one woman heals, she doesn't heal just for herself. She heals for her mother, for her daughter, for those who never had words for their pain. She opens a path not only for herself, but for those who come after her. Every step you take toward yourself is a step that lights the way for someone else. So even if this road feels lonely, even if you think you're not strong enough, remember this: you are never walking alone. Behind you is a river of women returning to themselves. Ahead of you is the full version of who you are becoming, and in this very moment, all you have to do is choose yourself, and the world will begin to rearrange to reflect that choice. You were never meant to live small. You were never meant to ask for permission. You are here to live truthfully, to live fully. Start now. Start with you.